Hello, Dr. Rob here. Welcome back to the MySQL part of the course. This video, we're going to be looking at MySQL data types. Let's see where we're going today. First, we'll start out by having a discussion on MySQL data types, and then I'll do a demonstration just examining what you can do with the data. All right, let's start out by talking about the data types. And just like Java, MySQL has different data types. SQL is a standard, and it's an international standard. SQL, by the way, it stands for Structured Query Language, and it's come a long way since its query days for sure. But MySQL supports all of the standard SQL data types. Now, many of the types you'll see come in various sizes, flavors. We'll start out with the whole number type, which is int or integer. Integer is a synonym for int. Now, unlike in Java, ints can be signed or unsigned. And you'll see in the table here that we compare the MySQL data types with the corresponding Java data types. So in MySQL, a tiny int is comparable to a Java byte. A small int compares to a short. A medium int there's no corresponding Java type. Int and integer correspond to a Java int in size and storage capacity. And then a big int corresponds to a Java long. All right, the next data type I want to look at is a fixed precision data type called decimal. Now, decimals are defined with precision and scale. So precision is the total number of digits, including the digits to the right of the decimal place. And scale is the number of digits to the right of the decimal point. For example, decimal 5,2 stores values from minus 999.99 to 999.99, positive. Notice that there are 2 decimal places and 5 digits total. Now, decimal numbers are exact and can be used for money. The Java class that corresponds to decimal is big decimal, not double. Double has problems with round-off errors, which can accumulate over time. Decimal, may have some round-off issues, but they don't accumulate, and that's the big thing that makes them applicable for money. Let's take a look at some date and time types. Date time has the format year, 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 or like 2027, dash month, month, like 05, dash DD, 12. And then there's hours, minutes, and seconds, all separated by colon. A timestamp is exactly the same as date time in format and storage capabilities. The only difference is that MySQL converts a timestamp to the Universal Coordinated Time, or UTC, which used to be known as GMT, when the data is stored, and then converts it back to server time when you pull it out. Date is just the date part of the timestamp, and time is the time part of the timestamp. Year is just what it says. It's a year value. All right, there's a couple of character types as well. There's actually more than what I've got here. You'll see in the next slide. A char is a fixed width storage with a maximum length of 255. So because it's fixed width, the value that comes back from the database is padded with spaces. A varchar is a variable width storage, like a string. More text types. There is a tiny text, which just stores up to 256 characters. Text stores up to 65,000 some odd characters. Medium text is bigger, and long text is, humongous. So that would contain like political speeches and maybe things. And now I'll just stop it there. Okay. Enumerated types, there's an enum type, which is very similar to the Java enum, and in that the column or the row of that column can contain a single predefined type. So if you define an enum having 1, 2, and 3 spelled out, then the column in that row must contain either 1, 2, or 3. There's a Boolean type, which you can set it to true or false, or 1 or 0. inside the database, it stores it as 1 or 0 and is returned as 1 or 0. So if you create the column with a type Boolean, it actually converts it to tiny int with parentheses 1. And note that the 1 is a display width, so it has no effect on storage size. You can actually take your Boolean value and set it to 15 if you want. There's nothing to prevent that from happening. And when a table is created, columns can be declared not null. Now this means that they must have a value when a row is inserted. Columns can also be declared as null, and this means that there is no value in the row at all. That means that the column is nullable. If not declared with null or not null, the column is nullable, meaning it can contain a null value. Now, there's another important keyword, default, and that supplies a value if the inserted value is null. And it's oftentimes used in timestamp or datetime, but can be used in other ways. And here you see timestamp not null default to the current timestamp. This is convenient for knowing when you inserted a record, for example. The MySQL will insert the current timestamp. Now let's turn to our MySQL client, dbeaver, and I will show you how some of these data types react. Don't worry about what I'm doing with the keywords and so forth, select statement. A select statement we'll find out in a forthcoming video, but that just returns or queries the data. And this particular statement says select all from the test table. In the test table itself, if I look at that, you'll see it's got an ID field, which is an integer. Then it's got an int, a decimal, a date time, a char, a varchar, both of length 5, a text type, enum containing 1, 2, or 3, and then a tiny int, which is our Boolean type. All right, let's just see what those can do. Right now, everything is set to null except the ID, and I'm going to use that to put a constraint on the update. So I can set int val, all these fields are nullable, so I can set int val to null, and if I look again, we'll see that int val is null. I can set int val to minus 4,000 if I want, and when I look at it again, you can see that it's set the value as minus 4,000. I can set it to positive, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and redisplay it, and you can see it changes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I cannot set it to a text type, ABC, for example. If I do that, I get an error, incorrect integer value ABC for column int val. Okay, so I'll set that back to null and rerun our query. Now let's look at decimal val. What are allowed values for that? Okay, I can set it to null, and MySQL likes that just fine. I can set it to this was I believe decimal 5, 2. Let me just double check that. Look over here, decimal 7, 2. Okay, so I can set it to a value like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.67. So that is 7 digits. So a precision of 7 and a scale of 2, and it likes that. Okay, let me read that back, and you can see it's set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.67. But if I add another digit in here and try and run it, I get an error, and it says it's out of range because it's too wide. I specified 7, 2, and this is 8. Okay, I can also not set that to a character value, but I can again set it to null. Okay, let's take a look at the date time val. Now that one is a little trickier. Okay, I can set that to null because it is nullable. and that's this column right here, date time val. I can set it to a valid value, say 2025-12-05, and then hours, minutes, and seconds. Hours would have to be less than 24, so I'll put 10:15:32, close it with a tick mark, and you can see that it updated the row. Let me reread that. And there's the value, date, time, 2025, 12:05, etc. Okay, I cannot set it to something like ABC. It says that's bad. If I set it to a value of like 1, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't like that. So it has to be a legitimate time value or null for this particular field, because it is nullable. Okay, there we go. Let me redisplay it with null. Now let's look at charval. So charval I can set to null, that's fine. I can also set it to, it had a length of 5, so I can set it to A, B, C, D, E, and that's fine, it likes that. Let me redisplay that. Char value, val is A, B, C, D, E. I cannot set it to A, B, C, D, E, F. That is an error. And when I try to set it to a numeric type, it does let me do that, interestingly enough, because it is shorter than the length, so it converts it to a string. But if I add a couple more characters on the end, it'll say that it's too long. Okay, so that's it for characters. And a varchar is just basically the same thing. The only difference is how it's displayed. So the char is actually will return 5 characters, no matter how wide the number of characters actually is. And a varchar will truncate it to the length of the string. So they're generally more useful, more aligned with Java, the varchar type. Text val, text type is just basically the same thing. It'll convert numeric types to text, and it'll take any text value at all. The only thing that's tricky, let's look at a varchar val, is the storing of quote marks. So I'll put quote well, let's see, let me change this to text val, because that allows me to put in more characters. So we'll put in Dr. Rob's thing. Okay, notice that it took Dr. Rob's thing up until the first tick mark. So if I want to put in an apostrophe, I have to put in 2 of them. Then I can run that, like I said, just fine. And if I display it, you can see that it displays with just the single tick mark. Okay, so let's set this back to null. Okay, and enum val is set to 1, 2, or 3, so I can change this to enum. And we can set it to null. That's fine, likes that, just fine. I can set it to 1, good, 2, good, 3, likes that, 4, nope, I cannot set it to 4 because it said it could have the values 1, 2, or 3. You can see that here. All right, and let me reread, set that back to null. The last column that I have is a Boolean. I created it as a Boolean, even though it displays it as that tiny int of 1, length 1. Okay, let's set this to, I can set it to true. And re-query, and you can see the Boolean value. Here it says, even though it took the value true, it actually set it to 1 in the table. So I can set it to 0, which would indicate false, and redisplay it here, and you can see it's set back to 0. Now, I said earlier in the slides that I could set it to 15 if I wanted to, kind of defeats the purpose of Boolean, but there is set to 15. And the reason is Boolean is a synonym for the tiny int type, which is the same size as a byte. So it takes values from -128 to 127. So I can't set it to say 1500 because that's too large. All right, so we've learned about several different data types. In this video, we've learned about ints, decimals, date times, char, varchar, text, enums, and booleans. That's a lot of data types. And I think that'll be sufficient for most of our needs. There are some other data types as well, so you can Google MySQL data types and you get the complete list. All right, that's it for data types. That's it for me. This is Dr. Rob signing out.